First Ladies um, Library Legacy Lecture. I believe this is our first one that is live on Zoom. So again, the technology is a little new to us, but if you aren't familiar with our organization, we're the National First Ladies Library, located at the National First Ladies Historic Site in Canton, Ohio. My name is Allison Kaplan. I'm Director of Education at the National First Ladies Library. And I am actually sitting here in my home in Akron, Ohio. And that is a little bit relevant because this year we are celebrating the suffrage centennial in Ohio and across the United States, so the passage of the 19th Amendment. And National First Ladies Library has been working to document it through exhibitions and programming. And we were a little disrupted by stay-at-home orders and the pandemic, but we're hoping that we will be back on our site soon and continue to organize programs remotely. And we have some really cool upcoming exhibitions that honor that. So it sounds like that recognition of the centennial will continue through the next year. And I mentioned Akron because it's significant in that Sojourner Truth gave her famous speech, the Ain't I a Woman speech, I believe 169 years ago on May 29th. So May 29th, 1851. So in a minute, I am going to give you some background information on Sojourner Truth. Then I will introduce Josy Jones, who I'm super excited to have here today with us. But first, I wanted to mention one upcoming program. So we'll be rolling out programming for June soon, but we started a book club over the winter, and we had our first meeting this past month. One of the things that we've been thinking about and we cover at the National First Ladies Library is obviously First Ladies of the United States, but also women's history. So we have been examining history through fiction and nonfiction titles. Last month we talked about Elizabeth Keckley, who was the dressmaker for Abraham Lincoln's wife. And this next month, we are going to look at Michelle Obama's book, Becoming. So next Thursday, same time, same place, different Zoom room, we will be discussing Michelle Obama's Becoming. If you haven't read it, it's a really easy read. It's wonderful to listen to as an audiobook. It's easily accessible through your local library. If you get online, you should be able to check it out. And you also have access to Netflix, which has a great documentary version of Becoming. So we're really excited about that. We're going to talk about the book, talk about some of the issues in the book, and then we will actually look at some of the journaling exercises in her second book, which recently came out, related to documenting your own experiences and your own lives. So I think it's a great time to think about that, and I'm really, really excited to dig into the book. So our book club just started and it's been really fun. So I encourage you to participate in that. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Cool. Okay, so on with the show. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about Sojourner Truth to start, and then I'll introduce Josy. Josy is going to be performing the speech, and then we'll talk a little bit about the play that she wrote and performed related to Sojourner Truth, and then we will open up to questions from all of you. So as you're thinking about this, please type questions that you might have for Josy into the box. Once she's finished, we'll open it up to questions from everyone. So a little bit about Sojourner Truth, and if you can see, I'm not going to swap over to my PowerPoint because I have only a few pictures, but you can probably see Josy's image of Sojourner Truth to give you an example of who she was and what she looked like. And again, we are going to be talking about that speech. Slave in Dutch-speaking Ulster County, New York in 1797. She was bought and sold 4 times and subjected to harsh physical labor, whom she had 5 children with, beginning in 1815. In New York's law freeing slaves took effect. Truth ran away with her infant daughter to a nearby abolitionist family. The family bought her freedom for $20 and helped her to successfully sue for the return to slavery. Truth moved to New York City in 1828, where she worked for a local minister. By the early 30s, she participated in religious revivals that were sweeping the state and became a charismatic speaker. In 1843, she declared that the Spirit had called on her to preach the truth, and she changed. As a traveling preacher, she met abolitionists and Frederick Douglass. Garrison's anti-slavery organization encouraged Truth to begin giving speeches about the evils of slavery. She never learned to read or write. The narrative of Sojourner Truth to Olive Gilbert, who assisted in the publication. Truth survived on sales of the book and sales of her photographs as well, which brought her national recognition. She met women's rights activists, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, as well as temperance advocates, both causes she was a champion of. Then in 1859, Truth began a lecture tour that included a women's rights conference in Akron, Ohio, where she delivered the famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech. In it, she challenged prevailing notions of racial and gender inferiority and inequality. During the 1850s, Truth settled in Battle Creek, Michigan, where 3 of her daughters lived. She continued speaking nationally and helped slaves escape to freedom. When the Civil War started, Truth urged young men to join the Union cause and organize supplies for Black troops. After the war, she was honored with an invitation to the White House and became involved with the Freedmen's Bureau, helping freed slaves find jobs and build new lives. While in D.C., she lobbied against segregation, and in the mid-60s, when a streetcar conductor tried to violently block her from riding, she ensured his arrest and won her subsequent case. In the late 1860s, she collected thousands of signatures on the petition to provide former slaves with land. Though congregally blind and deaf towards the end of her life, Truth spent her final years in Michigan and passed away November 26, 1883. So there's a little background on Sojourner Truth, and if you're an Akronite, you may have seen the space where the old stone church is. It is now on the site of the United Way building, and there is a plaque there. I actually saw it this morning because my favorite coffee shop is across the street, and I stopped by to get some coffee. So I am now going to introduce Josy. I don't know if she wants to reveal herself. I can see her in the room, and then we'll try to pin her up here in a second. So a little bit information about Josy Jones. I feel really lucky to know Josy and to have seen her perform some of her work before, but I've never seen her perform as Sojourner Truth, so I am super excited about it. Josy Jones is an actor, director, playwright, and community builder. She is an Akron transplant from Cleveland by way of Macon, Georgia, I believe. As an artist, Jones' goals are to tell stories of those who need to be heard and to appreciate underutilized spaces in our communities. As the founder of the Chameleon Village Theater Collective, she has had the privilege of activating galleries, a tattoo parlor, and even a public playground. She has also gotten the opportunity to work with many Akron theaters to amplify stories of underrepresented communities, including writing and performing a one-woman children's show about the life of Sojourner Truth through the Illusion Factory, writing an adaptation of Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew with LGBT plus characters, serving as a text curator for Q Theater, an LGBT plus youth theater company, and performing in Ohio Shakespeare's She Kills Monsters, a show featuring strong women characters in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. She is a recent recipient of the Akron Soul Train residency, was featured on the cover of Akron Life magazine in September 2019, and was the 2018 Emerging City Champion for teaching and producing a playwriting class for residents of Cascade Village to activate their neighborhood with live performance. So I am excited to introduce Josy, who will be performing the Sojourner Truth Ain't I a Woman speech. Thank you.
May I say a few words? I want to say a few words about this matter. I am a woman's rights. I have as much muscle as any man and can do as much work as any man. I have plowed and reaped and husked and chopped and mowed, and can any man do more than that? I have heard much about the sexes being equal. I can carry as much as any man and can eat as much too, if I can get it. I am as strong as any man that is now. As for intellect, all I can say is, if women have a pint and man a quart, why can't she have her little pint full? You need not be afraid to give us our rights for fear we will take too much, for we cannot take more than our pint will hold. The poor men seem to be all in confusion and don't know what to do. Why, children, if you have woman's rights, give it to her and you will feel better. You will have your own rights and they won't be so much trouble. I cannot read, but I can hear. And I have heard the Bible and have learned that Eve caused man to sin. Well, if woman upset the world, do give her the chance to set it right side up again. The lady has spoken about Jesus, how he never spurned woman from him, and she was right. When Lazarus died, Mary and Martha came to him with faith and love and besought him to raise their brother. And Jesus wept, and Lazarus came forth. And how came Jesus into this world? Through God who created him, and woman who bore him. Man, where is your part? But women are coming up, blessed be God, and a couple of the men are coming up with them. Man is in a hard place. The poor slave is coming on him, woman is on him, and he is surely between a hawk and a buzzard. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Josy, hi. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I have a few questions for you, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So I wanted to talk to you about your role as a playwright. We have been thinking and talking a lot about the way people interpret history at National First Ladies Library. And when I first met you, you were working on this play, and every time I saw you, you were walking around with a book with Sojourner Truth on the cover, picking through it and reading it. So I wanted to get a little bit of background on how you were commissioned to create this work that you created, which was specifically meant for children. I wanted to know a little bit about the background of the work and sort of what sources you look to, and why you chose a one-woman play as that sort of way to interpret it. So I hope that gives you enough to start with.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here and coming. You mentioned it in my bio. I was actually commissioned by the Illusion Factory, which is a touring children's theater. They toured to different schools and libraries around Northeast Ohio. And so I was working for that company as a company member for a while, and they were looking to get back into doing history relevant plays, and they usually do them as one person shows. I think it's just like resources and logistics wise, it just is easier to manage one person versus 4 people. So they approached me, asked me if I would write a play about her. This is the book. I pulled it. I don't know if you can see that at all. Yeah. It's called Sojourner Truth, A Life, a Symbol by Nell Irvin Painter. This is the main source of what I used to learn about Sojourner Truth. Yeah, and so they commissioned me, and it's the first time that I had written a one-woman show. I'm more used to writing dialogue. I'm not normally used to writing for children, so those are definitely challenges for me.
The follow-up question I had to you, since we're listening to you perform the speech, there's a lot of questions about where the speech came from, and if it was Sojourner Truth's actual words, because she was not literate and because it was interpreted, written down, and published later. There's a lot of discussion about, are those her words? Which speech did she actually write? I wanted to ask you about digging into that and thinking about it. How did you choose which speech? Can you tell us a little bit more of the history that you learned about that speech while you were researching this project?
Yes. So just like a caveat, I didn't really know much about Sojourner Truth before I was commissioned to do the play, except the Ain't I a Woman speech. And one of the first things that I learned was what I thought was true was not true, was completely false. And in doing that research, I decided that I wanted, if I didn't know, I knew that children didn't know. So I wanted to kind of shed some light on, this is the most accurate version. And you mentioned she never learned how to read and write. So even the version that I did, we are not entirely sure that that's 100% accurate because it was written down by someone else. The version that we know, I think came out about 10 or 12 years after she actually did the speech. And there is a website called the Sojourner Truth Project, where they actually put those speeches up next to each other, and they will highlight individual things that she actually are the most accurate version of what she said, next to the version that Frances Dana Gage came up with. And it is completely different. It is she wants her to have this like Southern slave dialect, which is not accurate at all. She's from New York, so she would not have sounded like a Southern slave. She, in all of my readings of her, she also was very eloquent in the way that she spoke. Dutch was her first language, so if anything, she would have had a Dutch, like Afro-Dutch American accent. And so I felt like in that research, in starting this work, that was the first thing that I learned. And I was like, oh yeah, no, this is absolutely the first thing that needs to be said, is this is not true. This is not false. She didn't even say Ain't I a Woman according to the most accurate version.
What other sources did you look to, having the unique experience of living in Akron where she gave the speech? Did you have access to local historians or other information that was helpful in putting the play together?
So I didn't use so much local stuff. I did visit the plaque that you were talking about this morning. And there is a church where she also spoke, I believe, that's downtown still. And I've been able to visit that space, but I didn't necessarily when I was commissioned, there was someone on the board who kind of led me in the direction of giving me some resources, but I didn't talk to anybody like local. I just did a bunch of reading.
Cool. Okay. Sorry if I'm shushing you, my 8.
Oh no, you're fine. I understood completely. There are babies and animals everywhere. It's
Are
fine.
there any other rituals that you have when you're getting ready to perform? We saw you put on costume of the bonnet and the shawl. At First Lady's Library, we've kind of been experimenting with historical performances. And I wondered, because we have some volunteers who are probably here, any recommendations you have for doing these types of things?
Right. So I am completely unlike Sojourner at this time. I'm much younger than she was at the time. I'm much shorter than her. She's actually very, very tall. I think she's about like 6 feet tall. So I'm nothing like her. So I was lucky to be able to do with the actual play, as I wasn't necessarily playing just her. I was playing several different characters. I played her mom. I played the Wagners, which were this like Quaker family that she lived with for a little bit. So I played different characters throughout her life, including her. I played Olive Gilbert. And so I got the wiggle room to not so much have to be her so much. And there's no video of her. So like I couldn't figure out how she walked or how she held herself. It really is just, you know, those cards that she was selling as a depiction of her. So what I try to do is be as tall as I possibly can, and kind of think about how much height she had and try to embody that in my body. And then also, her voice was a lot deeper than mine, apparently. She had a very deep, commanding voice. So I try to bring my own natural register down a couple notches. It's not as deep as her voice from some of the information that I've read, but just, you know, and the bonnet lives on. Every time I do it, I'm like, I have the bonnet because my depiction of her, all the pictures of her, she has that bonnet, not always the shawl, but definitely the bonnet. And so trying to figure out what little things I can do to try to embody her.
So you were commissioned to create this play specifically for children. And when you and I were talking about her narrative and her story, you talked about there are things that you had to leave out of it. If you were creating a similar play that was geared towards adults, is there a different story that you would tell? How did you approach talking about some of these issues of slavery and history? And, you know, history is kind of, I think about my experience as a child in history as it's everything written down in a history book. What is there is what's there. But thinking about these issues with Sojourner Truth, it's much more fluid. So I wondered how you approach that with children and how, if you would change it for an adult audience.
Yeah, so I definitely would change it for adult audiences. There were a lot of roadblocks that I got to once writing the children's play. One, it had to be less than 30 minutes. And she lived a long life and she did a lot of different things. She was very religious, and I was touring this to public schools. So we tried to, as much as possible, kind of leave some of that out, just so parents and what they want their kids to consume, and trying to kind of navigate some of that. So I would definitely include a lot of that. Like the speech that I did, she even talks about like a verse in the Bible, and I did not include that in the original show. I kind of cut it right before that, and just told them it was an excerpt from the correct version. A lot of the, like, her early life was really bad. You mentioned that she was like tortured, and a lot of that, it's included in some of the children's play, but I managed to kind of cloak it with, I like play a beat at some point. Like I'm playing a bucket, and it's like a poem. So I'm doing it in that way. So I am hitting those portions of her life, but not so deep. She I don't know, there's this weird way that people think about her as being kind of this, not that she wasn't a saint, but she just didn't have any things that we would think were weird. Like she was just this figure who was perfect, who was fighting for women's rights and abolition. And she had a lot of things in her life that were weird. Like she was in a cult at one point in her life. This one story about how I can't remember where she was, but she was doing a speech, and men at that time would try to belittle you or try to discredit what you were saying by saying that you could not be this eloquent unless you were a man. And they would say like, no, she's a man, she's just dressed up as a woman. And she like bared her breast in front of everyone and was just like, okay, are we done talking? Can we get back to what I was talking about? And she was not this, what we think about her as being this, clean circle of a person, but she was well-rounded, and she was much stronger and much more she had much more strength in her and much more willingness to be risky than I think that we know about her. And the thing that she didn't speak English was so interesting to me, because I was like, she was smart enough to not know how to read and write and teach herself English. Like that is, I don't think that everyone understands that. And when she started learning how to speak English, some of the first words that she learned, because she was working at a tavern, she learned how to curse very, very quickly. So like all of those things are a part of her story, and those are things that you can't necessarily include if you're doing it for children. So I would want to, if it was an adult version, I would want to make a version that is much more along the lines of, no, her life wasn't easy, and it wasn't this clean cut. She was just this mother figure that was an abolitionist. She was much more, she had more depth than that.
Was there anything else that surprised you about her story?
Oh, the thing about, so everyone seems to think that she had this really good relationship with Abraham Lincoln. She didn't necessarily, in what I've read, she didn't necessarily, he acknowledged her, but he didn't necessarily respect her in the way that it seems like. I think that in the readings, it sounds like she encouraged him to write in her book of life. He did not receive her the way that I think that we painted in history. And that and that her relationship with Frederick Douglass was also very strange, because he respected her not as much because she could not read and write, and he could, and he was also a former slave. So there are a lot of just like little details that were really interesting.
Last but not least, I wanted to ask you about, was this the first, it seemed like it might be the first time that you approached a historical character. I've seen you write down local people's stories and narratives and create plays and performances out of them. I was curious if there were any other historic figures that you would be interested in approaching in this way.
So I haven't thought about, I looked at that and I was like, I don't know who I would start with next. This is not my comfort zone as far as writing about historical figures. It was definitely fun, but I haven't considered writing anything else about anyone else. But if someone brings it to me, then I'll be like, I'll look through it. I'll look at it and do the best that I can, as I did with this project. It's a lot harder, I feel like, to write about historical figures, and then to write it for one person. Normally, like you said, I interview individuals, and I'm more community-based, getting stories from people that are living. And so with her story, it was very difficult to pinpoint. Usually I'm interviewing people about a specific subject. So if I'm interviewing people about Akron, I'm talking about Akron, and the lens is Akron. For Sojourner Truth, the lens is her entire life, and it doesn't really give you a focal point to talk about. So it was definitely a lot more difficult, and it was a wonderful challenge. I'd be willing to do it again, but I don't have anyone necessarily in mind that I want to write about.
Cool. So we should look into commissioning you to create something soon about a historical figure. Let's see. I feel like I had one more question and it just dropped out of my brain here. I wanted to ask about in relation to performing the speech and the play, so right around now is usually field trip season or performance season. So May is the time of year for school kids where things are winding down for school. Field trips start to happen. You would be going out to schools to do these types of performances. What was the reception from kids? And thinking about like the speech, I know that you've performed the speech in other places. So I wondered if you could talk about like performing the speech at the site or other places that you have done that and what the reception and experience was for that.
So I was initially very surprised that a lot of kids don't have any idea who she is. I grew up just knowing who she was. And again, the little I knew about her was a lie. And so a lot of them have no idea who she is. Because it's a children's show, they receive it pretty well. There's songs, so they get to sing along. And they always ask the most interesting questions. But yeah, I felt like it was perceived well. I think for children, for the children's shows touring to the different schools, you have to like it's very minimal set. It's the background and then like a couple of props. And so I performed in like a cafeteria that was also an auditorium. I performed in like gymnasiums. Yeah, but I think the perception was really well. A lot of kids like to hug you afterward. I feel like they know you after. they're excited. Yeah, and they're able to, and it's a lot of information, so I don't always know if they've gotten everything, but they seem to ask questions that they were definitely listening to, and they may not have gotten everything, but they definitely received her well.
I spent the past few weeks before school shut down going out to a school speaking about the history of women's suffrage. Sojourner Truth was one of the people we talked about. Ida B. Wells was another. And the kids would always ask, are they dead? Are they dead? And everyone is dead in history. So to see someone from history come to life was probably so exciting. So go ahead. Not being an actor, I just ended up adding Stacey Abrams because I wanted them to see someone who wasn't dead. This person's alive. But to see you alive and becoming this person must be really an exciting experience.
Yeah, I did get the is she dead question before. I also had a kid ask me, so what, like, he thought that it was me that I was talking about, so I was just like explaining my life. I don't know I don't know how he was young, so he thought it was me. So he was like, oh, you went through a lot, and I was like, this has nothing to do with me, but okay. Yeah.
And have you performed the speech at the site?
So I participated in Akron to Akron. If you've never gotten to do any of those, they do tours around Akron. So they will pick a specific neighborhood and pick up a specific route and then take you. So that time we were doing downtown. And if you don't live in Akron, the actual plaque where she did the speech is actually right in our downtown. And so we did a walk downtown, and then I did the speech at the actual site. And then I've gotten to do it for the Historical Society, had me do it for the, what is it? It's a historical hike, and it was at the West Zion Church downtown. So I've done it a couple times.
Well, Josy, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to have Sarah unmute people and open it up to questions from our audience. So if you have questions for Josy about her performance, about the play that she wrote, about her knowledge of Sojourner Truth, I'm going to hand it over to the audience. If you don't feel comfortable asking yourself, you please feel free to type it in, and Sarah and I can read it aloud. You're welcome to ask Josy questions if you have them.
Josy, I'm sorry, I came in a little later. I'm Grace. I'm in New York City, and I'm curious, have you done any work over here?
No, I
There's
have.
so many places in New York City that are available to you.
No, I have not. I would not be opposed to it, but I have not yet. It was for Akron and Northeast Ohio where it was commissioned, so I had no idea. But I would be open to it.
I mean,
So if you are listening, I know some people have us on the background, but we've unmuted everyone so we can open it up to questions for Josy. But if you are on, please mute yourself. So we're gonna hand it back over to Josy. Go ahead.
I don't know if you heard me.
I was a history teacher, so I'm just thrilled that you're going out and performing for kids and getting them excited. So I just want to thank you for doing that.
No, thank you. The Illusion Factory, they're no longer around now, but they were definitely a gem where they were hitting a very specific demographic of people that they don't necessarily get to see theater all the time, and have theater that's created for them. And so it was an honor to work for them.
how would I be able to send you some destinations or locations that you might want to connect with?
Yeah, so if I can put is it possible for me to put my email in the chat? And then
Sure.
if you want to get in contact with me, feel free.
Okay.
I don't know that I have access to everybody, but I sent it to Sarah. So Sarah, if you will please send it to everybody, that would be great.
Any other questions people have? I see a lot of people that we know, a lot of Akron people, and a few First Ladies people, some volunteers maybe too. So I'm so excited that you're all here. It's good to see you.
So I have a few questions, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Latif. Nice to meet you, Latif Calloway. Hi. How long have you been acting, and how do you resonate with? Have you resonated with Sojourner Truth yourself since doing it so many times? And how long have you been doing this program?
Right. So I've been acting for 10 years roughly. And as a Black actor, it's been an honor to portray someone who is like me, who looks like me, and to be able to paint a different story. I know a lot of times when you're in school and you learn about slavery and what happened, Black people are painted as being very as being helpless, essentially. Like this thing just happened to us, and we had no fight back. We had no gumption about us. And I have, in learning about her, have tremendous respect for her. And yeah, I feel every time I do it, I have to go back and I have to, read the play and brush up on remembering who she is and what she did. And every time I'm like, no, she's an accomplished woman. She's more accomplished than me. And and it's been an honor to get to know her story. And I feel more connected to her every time. And I feel it's been this blessing for me to continue to be able to portray her and share her story with others and tell people that the 8th Iowa Woman speech is a lie. That's been great. I like being like, no, it's a lie.
Yes, give me some clarification. Why in her speech did she say she bore 13 children, but she really didn't?
I don't know. Maybe she decided that she felt like it would hold more weight if she did, but go ahead.
Let me chime in there for a second. most times people say, yeah, did she give birth to 13 children? What she was actually referencing was her mother had born 13 children.
Mm-hmm.
So people can misconstrue that and think, so she actually bore 5 children and actually gave birth to 4. So one was a stillborn, but people say, well, Sojourner Truth, she was cross-referencing her brothers and sisters from her mother. That's why she didn't know. So that was a little confliction with so you're absolutely correct. The Ain't I a Woman version is very, very inaccurate. And I think it's more true to accuracy when you mentioned the SojournerTruthProject.com when they do the comparison. So thank you. Yeah.
No, thank you. And thank them, because they definitely, they helped kind of flush some of that out for me and made it so ridiculous of how much she just was like, I'm just going to make all of this up. And it was just completely ridiculous. So no, it's the Sojourner Truth Project. If you want to learn more about her, they also have people who are doing the speech. And they have, so her accent would have been lost by now. There would be nobody who has it now. So if you go to that website, they have people who are modern Afro-Dutch, who have modern Afro-Dutch accents, and you can hear different variations of those accents on the website, because obviously I do not have an Afro-Dutch accent. Which is something I would probably change if once I do the adult version. I would probably try to find a speech coach to help me kind of take on her accent.
Well, thank you. You're an inspiration. I'm glad I've had the opportunity to meet you virtually. And I'm really, is this something that you do full time, or is it, a hobby, or?
So it is something that I do most of the time. It's not a hobby. My acting and performing is a part of my career. I have to do things to supplement it at times, but I'm most of the year I am either writing or performing or creating or directing or some type of community project that is involved in the arts. So this is my life.
So how can we see the 30-minute children's version? I would love to see it.
So it's not recorded anywhere. I know. I'm a purist when it comes to theater, and I'm trying to do better because we are in a virtual world now, and the National Theater has been posting their live theater shows, and they look great. So I've been trying to kind of come off of my pedestal and be more open to having things recorded. But no, it's not recorded anywhere. I think there's like a snippet somewhere that someone recorded at one of the library shows. But yeah, there's no full version.
Okay.
Josy, can you tell everyone else about some of the other pieces you've worked on? Because I love this idea of thinking about the history of Sojourner Truth, and that her speech as an African American woman was probably recorded or by a white person and then reinterpreted and misconstrued or manipulated. So thinking of you performing them and reinterpreting them as a person of color is really interesting to me. But I'm also thinking about the works that you've created, and the piece that I saw that you performed was related to taking narratives from people in Akron and telling their stories and talking about addiction and immigration. So I'm really interested in how you're recording other people's narratives as a playwright and performing them, and that idea of like the integrity of their story. So can you tell us a little bit about the other pieces that you've done and relation to creating someone else's narrative?
Right. So I've done a couple. So one of the things that I think that theater is really great at doing is providing a platform for a voice for those who are not being heard or are not normally heard. And so my initial way of creating work was more collecting interviews from individuals. The first play that I did in that way was actually when I was still in school, and I wrote a play about about colorism in the Black community. This idea that being light-skinned means something different than being dark-skinned, and how those things kind of clash in our culture, and just interviewing Black women and how that affected them from childhood into their adulthood, and then collecting those and creating a narrative that is more digestible than talking to 24 hours worth of people's interviews. I've done it for the thing that you saw was Rebranding the City, humanizing tour of Akron, and I interviewed people in Akron's 24 neighborhoods about their dreams, their fears, their favorite things about Akron, their least favorite things about Akron, their life, their childhoods, and I think the thing that I try to do is just be honest, like with the Sojourner Truth, the anti-woman speech, just being able to be like, no, I presented something as honestly as humanly possible, and I portrayed the story of the person who trusted me with this information, because a lot of the with the colorism one, I did one on domestic violence, and interviewing people for that, and they're being vulnerable with me and letting me know these sometimes very traumatic things, like when people were dealing with addiction, or they lost a family member who was dealing with addiction. So it's very important to me to tell people's story and tell it as accurately as possible without, which was really hard for the children's play, because you can't really, I'm not normally PG. And so it was very, very difficult to kind of like bring that down and make sure that it was PG. But I definitely, I don't like to stray away from, no, this is what's happening, and this is what's happening to individuals, and you need to hear it. And if you get mad at me because I told you the truth about what's happening, you can't be that's fine, but I'm only telling you what I've been told and what is true. So if you don't like the play about Akron, you should talk to people who live in Akron and figure out why it is that they feel this way. So I hope that answers your question. Like it is important to me to make sure that people are heard, and heard for what they said, not for what I think they should have said.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions that people have for Josy? Okay, well, it's almost been an hour, so we are, Josy, go ahead.
Sarah asked me about the Sojourner Truth project. I'm actually going to go ahead and copy it into the chat.
Great.
But it's just the sojournertruthproject.com.
Okay. So please go and check that out and take a look at the different speeches and compare them. And Sarah just posted that into the chat. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really good to see you, Josy. It's been a while. Thank you for everyone who showed up today. This is really lovely. This has been, I believe, our first legacy lecture that has been Zoom based. So we are going to wrap it up here, but encourage you to check us out on social media, National First Ladies Library, and we are going to be discussing Becoming by Michelle Obama next week, so please join us if you can. Jenny Highfield, our director, is asking for you to stick around, Josy. So thanks so much to everyone. We're going to mill around here, I guess, in the room if you have questions or comments. So thanks so much for joining us, and have a great day. Stay healthy.
Thanks, y'all.